Hi, it's great to see you again. You're nice and early as well, so while we're waiting for the others, let me just explain something about this wood grain. What we're trying to do when we're doing joints is to keep the wood grain really long. Look at this. If I take that, the wood grain would run right the way up like so. And this will then make a really strong joint. And it's important that we keep looking at that. I can particularly show you what I mean by that if I take this bridle joint out of the way. If you look here at the whole section, you can see that if we had the grain running along this way, then it would be very short grain, and that is weak. And it's very easy to break short grain, so weak short grain. But if we have the grain running here from top to bottom of the joint along that bridle there, then you'll see it's very strong. So the long grain is strong, long grain strong. And we'll have a look at that in these next joints which are coming up. So in this video I'd like to look at carcass joints, and I've got 3 to show you today. Right, let's start with then the housing joint, which is really a wide but shallow joint, sometimes called a dado joint. Remember, a carcass joint is something like a bookcase or a drawer or a box itself. So if we get here a bookcase side, and then this would be the shelf. So to mark this joint out, I'm going to take a tri-square, and because the tri-square is not long enough to reach the other side, I'm going to place a ruler, a steel rule on top. Now I could mark this out with a pencil, but I'm not. I'm going to use this tool, which is called a marking knife. And it takes the place really of the marking gauge, because the marking gauge will no way be long enough to do the distances that we require. I can take the marking knife and run it carefully along that ruler, biting into the wood and cutting the wood grain. Now that's really important, because then we'll have somewhere to put our chisel, we'll have a slot there to put our chisel in. Oh yes, we're going to chisel this out again. So if I repeat this lower down at the thickness of the material that I'm using, then I'll be able to put a second mark along here, again with this marking knife. So this thickness here is the thickness of the material. There we go, thickness of this material of the shelf. Let's just move the marking knife out of the way. There we go, put it up there. Because I'm going to need the marking gauge in place. Now this time I can just mark a line down here with the scriber, 5 millimeters in, or 1/3 of your material, but no more than that. We really don't want this piece of wood here becoming too thin. I'll just pop the marking gauge down there. Now you may well say, Simon, what was the point of setting up that marking gauge just to do one joint? But can you remember that I've got another joint over on this side to mark out with a marking gauge, and then this shelf is going to be on an upright which needs marking out as well. So that's 4 joints I'm marking, or 4 sides. And then if I've got 3 or 4 shelves, then I could have 12 to 16 marks to make. So it's well worth doing. Then with a tri-square, I'll be able to just mark across this area here, like so. Now, if your bookcase is not too wide, you might be able to cut across here with a tenon saw. If it is very wide, then you're going to have to chisel. Now, again, the chiseling process is about cutting this area up into little small sections like so, and then perhaps again down the length here with your chisel, so you get your chips of wood. And then you can work in this direction with a chisel to cut the remaining wood out. But I would stop halfway, and then I would do the other side like this. Again, mark it with the chisel and the mallet, cut it out. You probably will only go down a couple of millimeters. This might take 2 or 3 goes to do it. But then you're going to chisel from this side, and that stops the wood from splitting out at the end if you work in towards the middle from both sides. So let's add a tenon saw and a mortise chisel to our tool list there. And of course, if you're using the chisel, you'll need a wooden mallet. Remember, that's a bit of safety advice. One hand on the chisel, one hand on the mallet, and then your fingers are safe. And once I've worked on that for a while, I can cut all of that joint out like so. Then putting on the PVA glue wherever the surface is touching, up at the top as well. I'll then be able to place the rail or the shelf into place and glue it up like so. Now, of course, there's a stop version joint of this as well. So can you see here that the carpenter has cut out a little step at the front and not carried this step, the slot, the groove here, all the way through to the front. So when the two are placed together, then you can't really tell that a joint has been made. Very clever, eh? So this is a stopped dado or housing joint. And you can see it here on this bookshelf being used in all of these areas. Okay, let's move on to a finger joint. Now, this is a joint that we would use in the corner of a carcass. And sometimes we refer to this as a comb joint. So let's show you this joint straight away so we can see what arrangement of fingers that we have. So here you can see I've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 gaps. You could also have 3 gaps, 7 gaps, 9 gaps. It's got to be an odd number for it to work symmetrically. So that would be the odd number of gaps here. Keeping it symmetrical along this line, and also we want it symmetrical about its center as well, with the grain running down this length here so we get the long grain on the fingers. Traditionally, this joint is incorrect because you've not got symmetry, but it would even be worse if we've got the grain running along this way. Now this one I'd mark out with a pencil because we want to avoid the score marks that we'd make across here if we used a marking gauge. It just makes it a little bit unsightly when you finished your box off. And to create a box, you're going to need 2 pieces marked out like this, and of course 2 pieces marked out like this. And I would say it's really important to put your hatching lines in the areas where you're going to cut out because you will get them mixed up. So you can mark all this out with a tri-square and ruler, and then you can use the tenon saw to do these cuts, can't you, down here and here quite easily to cut out those little corners. But here we need a slightly different strategy, because we could cut 2 lines down here with the tenon saw, and then we could cut right across here to remove this chunk of wood with a coping saw. And here's a coping saw. Remember, it's got that thin blade, so it cuts curves well. So we don't want to use it on this downward stroke here where the tenon saw is going to cut. That we want nice and straight. But then we can cut round the corner with the coping saw and remove this chunk of wood out. And all being well, your finger joint will look like this when you've cut out the other sides. And be careful when you glue up to make sure that you only put the glue on the surfaces which are touching each other. You can get caught out. And there we go, the finger joint. The finger joint exploits the idea here that we can see the end grain. So we produce this sort of like patterning up the side, which looks rather attractive. And hopefully you'll agree when I show you this example. So that's it. Join me in the next video for the best joint ever, the dovetail joint.